Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast Too Much Disinformation, the pod that uncovers the good, bad, and fake of the online world. I'm your host, Rafi Mendelsohn, and on today's pod, we're going to be discussing how disinformation tactics and techniques that we've previously seen in the public sector are actually moving, or we've seen them already, but are increasing and are increasingly becoming a threat in the private sector. Talking us through this topic is a real expert in this field, Luigi Lenguito. He is a native of Naples, Italy, but now resides in the south of France. And Luigi is the founder of Bfore.ai, a predictive cybersecurity company, which we're going to get to in a bit. I've met with him in New York and Tel Aviv, and I believe he's in Washington now, so he clearly gets around. He was previously a VP of EMEA at Quest Software, where he led a team of 300 people. Luigi spent 17 years at Dell, doing pretty much everything from consumer education, sales, and M&A. And he also started the Dell for Entrepreneurs startup program in France, which at the time was the largest FrenchTech accelerator. Now, if that wasn't impressive enough, clearly the most impressive thing on his CV is that he was also once a professional karting driver. If we have enough time, then I'll have to ask him about that. So without further ado, let's Luigi, thanks for coming on the show. Really great to have you. I normally start each episode by asking our guests what's their first ever social media account. So you're going to have to let us know.
So, this is going to date me. I started with a 1200 baud modem connecting to a bulletin board system in a text mode, sending email, what at the time was FeedOnNet mail. So not, well before internet started, and about 35 years ago, aside the graphical user interface, we would have about the same services that we have today. We would have ERC for the equivalent of Slack. We would have, other, the FeedOnNet mail for mail. But one thing stayed the same in these 35 years.
So I have to ask you about being a professional karting driver. A, what was that like? And B, how did you make it from karting to working in cybersecurity?
It's a long story. It could fill up the full podcast, so let's not get into too much details. But I think what's interesting to share is I actually see a lot of similarities between the time I was racing and the being a founder and an entrepreneur, specifically, the need to focus on what the actual KPIs of your business rather than your competition. It's a lesson that I think I see more and more every day. Right, there's so much noise in our industry, like in any other industry, but in cybersecurity in particular. And if you were to spend time looking at what the competitors do, then you wouldn't spend time with your customers. So I would say that that's the biggest learning at the time when I was racing. Is forget about the competitor, just be involved, stay in front of the pack, so you don't get into all sorts of issues and crashes and so on. And similar with Bfore.ai, we just need to be in front of the pack and ignore the noise and focus on bringing our innovation to everybody. And I think other entrepreneurs, of course, on their own KPIs and strategies.
And with your Bfore.ai hat on, you speak a lot about predictive cybersecurity, and that might be a new term for some people. Actually, might be a term that people have heard before, but may not understand exactly what that is. What does that mean for people listening? What is predictive cybersecurity?
Yeah, so maybe somebody, some on the audience will remember Minority Report, the movie with about 15 years ago, and the concept of pre-crime and the mutants. They could see the future of crime, and the pre-crime police that could stop the criminals before the crime was made. That's what we do. It's our product for pre-crime. We focus on cybercrime. We are able to identify the sources of cybercrime, the infrastructure from which the attack will start, hours, days, weeks in advance of the attack, and enable customers to preempt it. So what that prediction does is really give the information to the customer to prepare, to think, to avoid being hit, like blocking communication, or even actively defending themselves, like disrupting, taking down these infrastructures, like enabling different type of defenses that they may have in their own system. So my belief is that one of the challenges we have in cybersecurity and why everybody hear all this noise about the attack succeeding and the loss of data and so on is that cybersecurity for a long time has been moving more and more towards detection of the attack and response and resiliency, all very important things. But perhaps we have done guardrail to guardrail. Now we have too much into the action. And when you are in detection and response, you're basically a victim by design. And I don't like being a victim. And I know that our customers like Bfore.ai because we give them a tool to become an actor of their defense.
Okay, and so drilling down into kind of the specifics, what does that look like? How are you able to predict it? I'm also asking that because I know we've spoken in the past, and it's fascinating the way that you are looking at domains and your detection techniques.
Well, the system, to not go too much into the nitty-gritty details of the AI, works very similar to a weather forecast system. So think to a weather forecast system. You have satellites, you have temperature sensors all over the world, you have humidity sensors, wind speed sensors, and then you have those fantastic mathematical models that recognize certain patterns. And then you have supercomputing power, and you have smart people that keep improving the models. Bfore.ai works in a very similar way with the key difference that we focus on metadata, specifically on the internet networking metadata. So, routing information, IP addressing, domain names, and so on and so forth. And then the machine learning that we have built and patented built behaviors out of those data points that we collect daily across the entire globe. And then we train the system to recognize good and bad behaviors. And as we see behavioral changes of certain infrastructure getting closer to the bad behaviors, then the system triggers what we call a pre-crime score. That is the indication that goes into the threat intelligence suite to our customer or with our brand protection solution to protect them from impersonation and account takeover. So it's really a prediction capability, a couple of numbers to help the audience understand the value. Our what we call a pre-call time, which is the advanced heads up between the prediction and the actual attack, is today on a median of 28 days. Can be as short as 6 hours for very fast attacks. Can be as long as 6 months for very sophisticated attacks. But the median, so where the most of the prediction lands, is about a month before the attack. So as you can imagine, quite substantial. And we have only 0.05% of false positive. That means that 99 to 95% of the prediction actually realized over time. So we don't generate false alerts, we don't generate false alert fatigue. And last but not least, very important is the coverage of the system. We cover the entire internet. We have also very low false negative rate, so we miss few things. Of course, we miss the things we cannot predict. That's very important to say. The company is from Montpellier in the south of France, where Nostradamus was born, but that's not Nostradamus. So we cannot predict type of attacks that are vehiculated through other means than the network. So, for example, an insider rogue employee coming with a USB key, plugging a malware in the network, and doing some data exfiltration. That's not something we can predict unless the data get exfiltrated through the network itself in a north-south direction, so outside of the network, in which case we would probably have predicted the destination command control infrastructure.
Tools.
Yes, we look at the public internet. We don't look at dark web. We look at deep and public and visible because that's where the attack infrastructure has to be to attack the rest of the potential victims. So we leave to others the more challenging work, of the dark web.
And what you mentioned about attacks and actors, what is that? I mean, you mentioned impersonations, domain takeovers, etc. I kind of want to go into what those attacks, what those threats look like on the ones that you're coming across on a day-to-day basis.
So these are not. So first of all, the system predicts all. So we're not going to be very specific to an industry or to a given customer. we are looking at more economical crime. That is the large majority, but still very, very important. And it's things like from very easy phishing keys and the impersonation attacks to email, with business email compromise, to more sophisticated account takeover and malware, data exfiltration, ransomware. Now we're getting a little bit to social media, working also with Cyabra. So it's really I would say everything that is economically motivated is something that we would cover as long as obviously our models can predict it. And that's something of course we also investing to make them more comprehensive. So that's what
And is this new? Are you seeing new types of techniques? TTPs, as said in the industry. Are you seeing new kinds of techniques, or are there new types of attacks, or are there new types of organizations that are being affected?
So first of all, we don't do attribution, so we don't know who's behind the attack. That's very important. We cannot tell. We don't focus on the technique of attack themselves. The way the system works, we focus on the techniques to build the infrastructure that will be used for the attack. And this is actually has an advantage, that is that we are threat agnostic. So it's a new technique, new 0 days, new way of exploiting vulnerabilities come up. It doesn't matter to us because the system will be looking just at the back-end infrastructure, like command and control servers, like emission servers, and so on. And but that stage, we do see a proliferation. We do see it's like weather forecast. So we see the volume as well as the direction of the wind or the color of the clouds, if you like. And there are definitely peaks and bounds in activity. For example, I can tell you between November and January, we saw a strong reduction of phishing attacks. But we saw and remember, we are seeing now the results of what we saw at the time. So now we see maybe less. We saw at the time less phishing infrastructure being built. Now there is maybe less phishing activity, but at the time we saw an increase in build-up of ransomware infrastructure. Now we see an increase in ransomware activity. So that's kind of the ability of forecasting. But it gets very specific to the customer. We give them the IP addresses, domain names that they need to use to block this infrastructure. So it's a machine-to-machine API in most of the use cases, and it's used to avoid getting in touch with
And we were speaking before we came on the podcast. We were speaking about the types of the direction of the types of techniques that we're seeing. Maybe has more common with the public sector, right? What were those tactics, and how are they migrating over to the private sector?
Yeah, so that's something we have started to see. I would say toward mid 2022, we started to see a new use of a combined ransomware and social media amplification type attack. And we're still trying to understand it. To be fair, it's still very nascent. But our perspective is that the propaganda, disinformation techniques that were used by state actors are now migrating into the commercial prime. We have kind of seen that in some cases there have been ransomware or kind of ransomware attacks, but based on the brand reputation, where basically the threat actor is asking to pay a certain amount to avoid tarnishing the brand of a company. And let me give you a couple of examples where maybe this bring it more to bear. Some may remember, may know in November, Twitter changed the blue tick standard, right? So now you have to pay $1 every month. And the first thing that happened the next day, a fake account for the Eli Lilly brand, is a pharmaceutical company producing insulin in the US, among other things, was created. This fake account, published a tweet saying, "From tomorrow, insulin is going to be free for all." And it was amplified. And I think, some of the things we have seen is that most of this early amplification was unauthentic. It was fake bots, warm bots. that actually pushed. And then a second wave came of actual true accounts that saw the message, they got very interested and started amplifying it even more. Well, long story short, in the next 24 hours, the Eli Lilly stock lost $16 billion in value because obviously it was totally fake news. And you look at it and say, wow, let's assume for a moment this was all a coincidence. But people can get very quickly inspired, from a criminal perspective, to these techniques that are definitely available in state actor level to basically punish brands and push some disinformation that can be, bad taste from the consumers toward their favorite brands and whatever. And so there is a need for us to build, because we love prediction and we like to be a fun, there is a need to build a system that monitor those worm accounts. That's how we met actually. We started to work together, something like that, to identify this kind of wave forming of amplification. It's unauthentic and it's related to a bad sentiment. It's one of our brand customers, right? And I think there's another example that comes to mind. Again, we don't have the proof, but we are studying it. Everybody has heard about the SVB bankruptcy. And when you actually look at the kind of the dynamics behind the source and the challenges that they had with the credit line, I'm not think that I understand that much. But where it really started is that I think it was on a Saturday morning on a very closed chat in the Silicon Valley where there were someone started to say, we're going to take all the money out of SVB. And what if that account wasn't actually the true person in that chat, but was a fake account or somebody impersonating that account? Well, long story short, that started the bank run. And we know how it ended, right? So this is still going on. We saw with First Bank, still kind of contamination happening in the system. So to me, it's very important that you think about the speed. Ethernet was not that quick. Well, the 1200 baud modem could be disconnected, right? But how do you disconnect the social media amplification going across multiple social media, some of which are controlled countries or anyway are hosted in countries where maybe there is a bit of less ability to influence them, right? So I think that's one of the challenges that we will see in the coming years, if not months. And
I think these are great examples, especially the Eli Lilly, because I think that was the moment that many people, many companies, and I'd imagine many boardrooms are having conversations of saying, wow, look how easy it was to be able to create an account and then not challenging at all to also create accounts that amplify that. And away we went, right? The impact that had. And I think all of us are watching from afar that's in the industry and saw, wow, this is a real moment. But for many of those people who are responsible for preventing those kind of attacks, I think they were also thinking, right, how do we have the right tools? Look how easy it was. It wasn't sophisticated. It could have been done by anybody in their bedroom with a laptop. And so I think that kind of sparked the real conversation in the commercial sector. I wonder whether many conversations think, okay, well, that's an isolated attempt. That's not really going to happen to me. So it's really interesting the way that you kind of unpacked the fact that it wasn't just one tweet. It was also the amplification of following the hours afterwards, which kind of makes it a bit more coordinated, makes it a bit more targeted.
And I think more than anything, it proved for me the need of not being under detection and response. By the time you have detected, let alone responding, is already too late. The speed of the attack will just be mind-blowing. And so, to me, it's very important that we keep pushing our evangelization about prediction and preemption and being one step before the attack happens. That requires machines, because the reality is no human being can be as fast. And we are entering in a very interesting age of machine against machine. I say Bfore.ai against Red AI. It's not happening yet, but it's getting very, very, very close.
Fascinating, really, really interesting. And I think the classic attacks that you may, ransomware, for example, but then the amplification on social media, gazing into your weather prediction system as you do, what's the direction of that?
I mean, there is actually another example, over the Christmas period, if I remember well, there was this healthcare company in Australia that was victim of ransomware, and then decided correctly not to pay ransom. But then, out of the blue, there was a huge campaign in the news about how the CEO was paid so much and why he's not paying little ransom compared to the biggest scheme of things. And now the data of their customers is out there, and they're gonna be victim and so on. So the brand value was tarnished, and again the stock value was impacted. And again, you can ask yourself, was there some background influence, maybe coordination of the messages, and maybe trying to push some narrative with the newspapers? Again, these are techniques that are known, and you are the expert in the public sector and government, and impacting elections, impacting information, and so on and so forth. Especially in certain area of the world, the people that do commercial crime are very adjacent to the people that do those public cyber attacks. It's not the same people. So I think that's where they just, now productizing, let's call it the way, the tools that they have. and we know that ransomware as well, started with malware and started before that, spyware and stuff like that. I think that's where, what today seems like a far-fetched type of an attack, unfortunately, because these guys are very innovative and they have, a lot of funding on their capabilities, and they are, I have a lot of respect for these criminals because they are very much like us in the startup world. There is a bunch of very smart people acting very fast, building organizations, and some of those groups have tens, hundreds of people involved. So recently on the dark web, an announcement for a community manager for a dark web forum. So and actually, they're getting into job hiring, and anyway, fascinating from one side, but very scary from the other, and that's what motivates us every day to, bring a little bit more into our technology to try to help our customers to be safe.
Absolutely. And so those are the threats that are coming along. Interesting that you mentioned a kind of increase from the midway point of last year, I think is what you said. So if you are in a security threat risk CISO position and you are responsible for constantly reacting, but also predicting, those are the threats out there, right? So for anyone listening so far, it may be a bit more fear, but obviously we don't want to just focus on the fear. What are the tools? What are the things that they should be doing? What are the things that they should be thinking about?
I think the first thing is kind of the 101, anyone in security is assess an assessment. Who's actually managing your brand? We still see many companies where this is the legal team that really is looking at from a trademark perspective, or it's the marketing team is looking from the deliverability of email perspective. This is a security issue with more and more business going online, and the reputation and impact it out. And also, even very small individual, it's going to make laugh some people, but we offered recently a free takedown service as a lead generation campaign for our business. And we actually were not surprised, but kind of confirmed one of my fears. Many of the people that responded were early funds. That they have a brand, they have to protect it, and obviously they were being scammed or they were being impersonated and things like that. And these are individuals that have very limited capability to protect themselves, and plus they are exposed for a number of other reasons. So I think that the first assessment, understand where you are, and then second, look at the maturity scale of where you are and how this risk is likely for your brand. Maybe if you are a B2B with a very selected number of customers, very selected number of suppliers, that's not a big deal because there's very limited exposure to all of these. But there are some other B2B that are more public facing, or they may have a scale of a supplier that is more relevant. So, it's always a risk management balance that needs to And then, of course, if that is a high risk, high impact situation for the organization, then there are organizations like Cyabra, like Bfore.ai, many of our colleagues in the industry that can bring solutions. Some more predictive than others, and eventually enable preemption. This is the other. I'm here in Washington D.C. this week. Meeting some of the public sector, and I'm trying to understand. What's the kind of the philosophy of all solution of active defense. Active defense is where the private companies are putting actions in place to disrupt the attack before the attack happens, without going into offensive and that is legal, but it more, can we create a coalition of goodwill to block communication to this malicious infrastructure before they start to communicate? We work with some partners like Online, like VirusTotal already in this type of activities for our active defense product. So I think things are evolving, and definitely the risk is new risks are coming, but new technologies to protect from that risk are coming as well, and I think the key challenge is really prioritize. Understand your exposure, understand your assets, and then prioritize based on the risk management protocol, whatever that is for your organization is the core thing first and foremost.
So you mentioned a coalition of goodwill, coalition of stakeholders. I couldn't agree with you anymore. And I think a big part of that is also education and having people like yourselves talk it through, let us in behind the curtain to your weather system as to what you're seeing and what you're seeing further down the line. So really appreciate the time you've taken to spell it out and explain it to us. For those that are interested in learning more about bots and impersonations and disinformation, all the work that you're doing, where are the best places that people could follow you?
First of all, LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn maven, so I post a lot of stuff, and our team as well. Of course, our website, Bfore.ai, before and then Twitter, same Bfore.ai account.
Great. And the chances are, if you get in touch with Luigi, the amount of traveling he does, he's probably going to be in a city nearby anyway in a matter of weeks. So he's always seems to be on a plane, always seems to be somewhere. So do reach out if you have any questions. The way that we like to finish each episode is by asking each guest one thing good, one thing bad, and one thing fake that you're seeing online. We've kind of touched upon probably an element of each of those, but I was wondering if you could give us a short answer for each one.
Yeah, and the three things you see are related for me. I'll start with the bad, and then I'll finish with the good.
Thank you.
So on the bad side, of course, we have AI in our system, so we kind of understand the capability of this technology, and obviously the rise of the use of AI from threat actors and criminals is a very bad thing. And like any tool, unfortunately, can be turned in a very malicious way, and I think that's a very bad thing that unfortunately these tools will be accessible to these people. Fake is definitely the use of this technology for video. We have seen cases of impersonation where there was a conference call and an avatar of some important person was on the conference call and was saying information that caused impact to various, sites. And, we know how easy it is already to be tricked into an email, and it's pure text, and there are titles. Now, when you have a video that replicates a person as precisely as the new deepfake technology are showing it up, that's going to create a whole lot of new lack of trust needs. And we're working on solutions in that space as well, but it's moving very, 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 very fast. Let me leave it on the good.
Thank you.
Because AI because there is all this conversation about AI and about deepfake and ChatGPT inventing facts in the answers and so on and so forth. I think doubt will resuscitate. Right? Everybody was giving too much attention and credibility to things that we're reading online in posts, and we know all the complots and other type COVID and the moon and things like that. I think DAO is still by the fact that people will understand they cannot trust anymore. Right? I'm a big fan of X-Files, the movie, the series from the 90s, in which there was this big poster saying "Trust no one." I would go to the next and say "Trust no one, but verify."
Okay, so the message there is trust no one but verify, and I think the key thing there that my takeaway is that it's a muscle that I think previously people weren't working on because they were accepting the information, but actually we're now developing that muscle of what am I reading? Where is this from? Is this correct? And that comes from the distrust in a certain way. Really, thank you for talking through all of those things. I learned a lot. I always do whenever I speak to you. Really appreciate you coming on. And thanks for the time and enjoy the rest of Washington and your travels.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye-bye.